Grandma left my brother a house and me an old journal. When I opened it, I nearly fell off my chair. I never expected my life to take a turn because of a battered leather journal. It happened the day after Grandma's funeral. My brother Travis and I sat in the attorney's office, still feeling the weight of saying goodbye. Grandma wasn't a rich woman, but she left us something. Travis got the house in the Chicago suburbs, a two-story colonial with peeling paint, a creaky porch swing, and memories soaked into every corner. It wasn't perfect, but it was real estate. I got a journal. The attorney handed it over like it was a treasure. A worn, brown leather cover with scuffs that spoke of years of use. I tried not to show my disappointment. For years, I'd been the one helping Grandma. Every Saturday, I'd mow the lawn, haul groceries up the stairs, and drive her to that tiny corner cafe where they served donuts, so sweet the glaze practically sang to your teeth. Travis? He visited maybe twice a year, and mostly just complained about the house smelling like mothballs. I flipped the journal open. The first page was filled with Grandma's familiar handwriting. Knowledge is worth more than bricks and mortar. Seek where history leaves its mark. I snorted. Of course. Grandma always loved riddles. She'd hide crossword puzzles in her purse and quiz me about random trivia while we waited for our food. But now, I wasn't in the mood for games. My brother was practically gloating about his new house, probably already planning the renovations. And me? I got a philosophical scavenger hunt. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a reheated slice of pepperoni pizza from Lou Malnati's and a can of Coke, the journal lying open under the dim light. Most pages were filled with scribbles about family recipes and occasional thoughts about life. Nothing groundbreaking. But when I reached the last page, my pulse kicked up a notch. The handwriting was Grandma's, but the words felt unfamiliar, like she was speaking in riddles. Start with what you see when you look at the sky from the park. I flipped back through the pages, skimming hastily. There were notes about neighbors, holiday plans, and plenty of mentions of our Saturday donut trips. But then I noticed a pattern. Grandma had underlined words in seemingly random places. History, time, direction, and truth. My pulse quickened. Grandma never did things randomly. I leaned back in my chair, tapping the journal against my palm. It didn't make sense, but there was a whisper in the back of my mind, a mix of excitement and unease. Grandma wasn't one to leave things to chance. If she wanted me to start with the sky from the park, she must have had a reason. I didn't rush out the door just yet. Instead, I poured another cup of coffee and settled in, flipping through the journal page by page. There were more clues hiding in plain sight, dates circled, phrases repeated. It was like Grandma was trying to tell me a story within the story, and the more I read, the deeper the mystery became. The night stretched on as I pieced together fragments of Grandma's carefully hidden puzzle. The mention of the park was just the beginning, but the journal held so much more. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the real story was just beginning. The journal lay open in front of me, its worn pages crackling slightly every time I turned one. The scent of old paper mixed with the stale aroma of my half-finished Dunkin' coffee. Grandma's handwriting sprawled across the pages, neat and deliberate, with occasional flourishes that made me hear her voice in my head. Calm, curious, always with a hint of playful mystery. As I flipped through, I found a section labeled Summer of '53. The entries painted vivid scenes of simpler times. Weekend barbecues in the backyard with hot dogs sizzling on the grill, the sharp tang of mustard in the air, and neighbors gathering to chat about everything and nothing. Grandma wrote about ice cream trucks with jingles like "Pop Goes the Weasel" that stuck in your head for days, and family picnics at Lakeview Park. Lakeview Park. That name stirred something familiar in me. I remembered sitting on Grandma's lap when I was a kid, looking at black and white photographs of that park. She'd point to the Ferris wheel and say, "If you know where to look, you can find history hiding in plain sight." I'd always roll my eyes, thinking she was just being her usual quirky self. Now, I wasn't so sure. The journal mentioned Lakeview Park's free rides every Monday and how Grandma and Grandpa would sneak away there when they were dating. One entry stood out. The park knows more than it seems. The Wheel of Time hides more than just views from above. Grandma had never written anything like that before. At least, not in anything she'd shown me. My phone buzzed with a notification, but I ignored it, rereading the sentence. The park knows more than it seems. The Wheel of Time hides more than just views from above. My stomach did a little flip. The Ferris wheel. Grandma always loved that ride. Even when she got older, she said the view reminded her of simpler times. Like when she'd get ice cream with Grandpa and argue about who'd pay the quarter for the ride. But what did she mean by the Wheel of Time? I scanned the pages around that entry. Grandma described long walks with Grandpa through the park's winding paths, feeding ducks at the pond, and playing with puzzle books on picnic blankets. Crossword puzzles, her favorite. She used to say that every puzzle had a pattern, even the trickiest ones. She loved the Sunday New York Times crossword, the kind that made most people give up halfway through. The journal shifted from cheerful park memories to cryptic notes. Words like direction, history, and time appeared again, underlined with a faint pencil stroke. One entry had a circled phrase, 1953, Ferris wheel base. Look where the shadows meet. My heart raced. A hidden spot near the Ferris wheel? It sounded straight out of a Hardy Boys book. I rubbed my eyes and laughed softly. Grandma, the puzzle master, had clearly left me with one last game. I could almost hear her saying, "Come on, Jake. Don't give up before the fun starts." The clues lined up like pieces of one of her Sunday crossword puzzles. Lakeview Park, the Ferris wheel, 1953, shadows meeting somewhere. I didn't know exactly where to look yet, but I was sure the answer was hidden in the journal. I turned back to the next page and found a line written in larger letters. The past leaves footprints for those who dare to follow. The excitement buzzing through me was undeniable. Grandma had always said history was more than dates and events. It was stories waiting to be rediscovered. And right now, I was living one of hers. The Ferris wheel at Lakeview Park was more than just an old amusement ride. It held a secret. I just needed to figure out where the shadows met. The night stretched on as I turned page after page, searching for the next clue. Somewhere in these lines, Grandma had left a map to a story she wanted me to uncover. I was certain of it. The mystery deepened with every word, and I couldn't wait to solve the next part of the puzzle. The next morning, I tossed on my Cubs cap, grabbed a thermos of coffee, and hit the road. I even debated grabbing a bacon, egg, and cheese from the drive-thru, because no mystery gets solved on an empty stomach. Lakeview Park wasn't far. A 30-minute drive through neighborhoods lined with neatly trimmed lawns and kids on bikes racing each other to who knows where. As I drove, memories surfaced. Sticky cotton candy fingers, the clink of quarters dropping into arcade machines, the creak of the old Ferris wheel as it made its slow, deliberate turns against the sky. When I pulled into the gravel lot, the park looked smaller. The ticket booths were boarded up, the sign overhead, once a cheerful welcome to Lakeview Park, was faded and cracked. The smell of damp leaves and rust hung in the air. My footsteps crunched on the gravel as I moved toward the entrance. I half expected an old carny to pop out and tell me the park was closed, like some low-budget horror movie. Near the gate, a wooden post stood weathered and splintered with age. I ran my hand along the rough surface. There, just below eye level, was a carved star with the numbers 1953 etched beside it. My heart did a little two-step, the date from Grandma's journal. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the pictures I'd taken of the pages. 1953 Ferris wheel base. Look where the shadows meet. The Ferris wheel. I turned toward the center of the park, where the skeleton of the wheel loomed against the morning sky. The sun had just begun to rise, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Walking through the empty pathways felt like stepping into an old photograph. The carousel was still there, though the painted horses were chipped and faded. I passed a concession stand with a peeling menu that still listed hot dogs for 75 cents. My stomach growled. Memories of sharing greasy, mustard-slathered hot dogs with Grandma on the park bench surfaced. She always let me sneak an extra packet of ketchup, despite her insistence that mustard was the only acceptable topping. Carnival food. Delicious going down, questionable hours later. I reached the base of the Ferris wheel. The structure groaned softly in the breeze, its metal frame streaked with rust. The shadows stretched out across the ground like skeletal fingers. I moved around the base, looking for anything that stood out. The concrete platform was cracked and uneven, but in one corner, I noticed faint letters scratched into the surface. SW, Southwest, Shadows West. Grandma had always said directions mattered, especially when solving puzzles. I checked the time, just past 9 a.m. The sun was still low, casting the longest shadows toward the southwest corner of the platform. I followed the shadow until it intersected with an old bench. The bench looked like any other, but as I crouched down, I noticed something etched beneath the seat. For M and J, Summer 53. M and J, Margaret and Jack, Grandma and Grandpa. I ran my fingers over the letters, though it felt smoother here, as though it had been handled often. Grandma's words echoed in my mind. The past leaves footprints for those who dare to follow. My eyes scanned the ground beneath the bench. A few loose bricks lay haphazardly at the base. I grabbed one and pulled. It came free with surprising ease. Behind it was a small, rusted tin box wedged into the earth. I sat down on the bench, heart racing. The box felt cold and solid in my hands. I pried the lid open with my car key. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed and fragile. If you're here, you've followed the first step. The wheel turns, but time stands still where memories rest. Look where the names of lovers last forever. My pulse quickened. Lovers' names. The park was littered with carved initials on picnic tables and benches. But names of lovers sounded specific. I stood up, the paper trembling slightly in my grasp. This wasn't just a playful puzzle. Grandma had left this for me, and whatever came next, I had a feeling it would lead me deeper into a story I never knew she had lived. As I turned back toward the Ferris wheel, the shadows shifted, pointing toward a grove of trees on the far side of the park. My eyes followed the line of darkness, knowing instinctively that the next clue was waiting there. When I reached the bench again to double-check the markings, something caught my eye. Another carving just below the first. A place to warm the heart. A place to warm the heart. I muttered under my breath. My mind raced. Grandma loved fireplaces. The park's old maintenance shed had one, if I remembered right. Or maybe the picnic pavilion with the old brick hearth. A commotion of memories stirred in my chest. This wasn't just about history. It was about the warmth of shared moments. A place to warm the heart had to mean a storage room or a hidden corner with a fireplace. The star with 1953 on the wooden post? It wasn't just decoration. It was a beacon, and Grandma had been guiding me here from the start. Mystery solving, it turns out, is a lot like assembling IKEA furniture. Confusing, frustrating, but weirdly addictive. I drove home from Lakeview Park with my mind racing faster than the rusted Ferris wheel I'd just left behind. My brain hadn't worked that hard since I tried to figure out last year's tax forms. A place to warm the heart, Grandma had written. It had to be a storage room or a fireplace, something connected to warmth and comfort. But where exactly? I couldn't shake the feeling that the journal held more answers. Back in my apartment, I dropped my keys on the counter, reheated some leftover pizza, and collapsed onto the couch. I turned on the TV for background noise. An old sitcom laugh track filled the room while I opened the journal. The leather cover was scuffed from years of handling. I ran my thumb along the edge, then opened it to the middle and started reading. Grandma's handwriting transported me to a different time. She described growing up in the 50s, when money was tight and fun came cheap. There were vivid memories of hot summer days spent collecting soda bottles for a nickel each and long winter nights when the family huddled around a wood-burning stove to stay warm. Christmas was simple. Homemade cookies and hand-me-down toys, but it was always special. I could practically hear Bing Crosby singing White Christmas from the old record player she always kept in the corner. We never had much, Grandma wrote, but we had a plan for the future. We always kept hope alive. The phrase plan for the future was underlined twice. I flipped a few more pages, skimming through descriptions of family picnics, Sunday drives to nowhere in particular, and lazy afternoons making ice cream in a hand-crank machine. Then, toward the bottom of a page dated December 1953, my heart skipped a beat. The cupboard behind the fireplace, our hope. It's not in the past. It's for the future. Cupboard behind the fireplace. I sat up straight. Grandma had mentioned fireplaces before, but this was specific. I thought back to their old house, the one Travis inherited. It had a big stone fireplace in the living room. I remembered sitting there as a kid, building Lego castles on the rug while Grandma rocked in her chair and told stories about simpler times, which I was pretty sure was just code for times before the internet. I closed the journal and rubbed my temples. The house was technically Travis's now, and we weren't exactly on the best of terms. He'd probably roll his eyes if I told him I needed to check behind the fireplace for some family mystery. Still, curiosity gnawed at me. The next morning, after a night of tossing and turning, I texted Travis. "Hey, any chance I can swing by the house? Need to check something." His reply came quickly. "Why, planning a heist. Just some family history stuff," I responded. Grandma's journal mentioned the fireplace. After a long pause, his text came through. "Fine, but don't mess with my new rug." I grinned despite myself. Travis was still Travis, more worried about decor than family secrets. Later that day, I pulled up in front of the old house. The familiar creak of the porch boards greeted me as I stepped onto the veranda. The fireplace stood just inside the living room, its stone facade unchanged except for a modern TV mounted above it. Travis sat on the couch, arms crossed. "All right, Sherlock," he said. "What are we looking for?" "Something behind the fireplace," I said, running my hand along the stones. The journal didn't mention how to access the cupboard, just that it existed. My fingers traced the mortar lines until I felt a slight ridge. I pressed it. Nothing happened. Travis sighed. "This better not mess up the paint." Yeah, I muttered. I pressed again, harder. Still nothing. I stepped back and stared at the structure. Grandma loved puzzles. She wouldn't make it obvious. Then it hit me. The brass fireplace poker. It had a distinctive eagle head, something Grandma had always pointed out. I grabbed it from the stand and twisted the handle. It moved with a metallic click. The stone panel shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap. Travis's eyes widened. No freaking way. I haven't been this surprised since the Cubs won the World Series. I pulled the stone aside, revealing a small wooden door. Behind it was a cupboard, just as Grandma had written. Inside, there was a small metal box. "Holy crap," Travis whispered. "What is that?" I opened the box. Inside was an envelope labeled "For the Future." The paper trembled in my hands as I opened it. Inside was a single key and a note in Grandma's handwriting. "The past is gone, but hope lives here. The next step waits where time stands still." I exchanged a glance with Travis. We both knew exactly where that was. The old grandfather clock in the hallway, the one that had stopped ticking the day Grandpa died. The mystery was far from over, and now we were in it together. And honestly, it beat arguing about leftover Thanksgiving pie. The grandfather clock stood in the hallway like a silent witness to generations of family secrets. Travis and I stared at it. The note from Grandma still clutched in my hand. The clock hadn't ticked since Grandpa passed away, but now it felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. It reminded me of those old clocks in movies, the kind that always seems to chime right before something spooky happens. "So, we just open it?" Travis asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah," I said, stepping forward. I fit the key into the lock on the small glass door. It turned easily, and the door creaked open, revealing the clock's brass pendulum and gears. Nothing unusual, except for a small brass key sitting on the wooden shelf. "Another key?" Travis said, his voice laced with disbelief. I picked it up and examined it. It was nearly identical to the one Grandma had hidden behind the fireplace. Same shape, same weight. But on closer inspection, I noticed a small engraving near the handle. A tiny arrow pointing left. The first key didn't have that mark. I slipped the key into my pocket without saying anything. Travis was already smirking. "Dude, you're seriously chasing ghosts," he said. Grandma wasn't exactly all there toward the end. I felt a sharp pang in my chest. "Don't," I said, my voice low. "What?" "It's true." She was obsessed with puzzles and mysteries. Probably just her way of coping. I clenched my jaw. "She left us this for a reason. Just because you got the house doesn't mean you get to trash her memory." "Relax," Travis said, raising his hands. "I'm just saying, you're acting like you're about to dig up buried treasure." "Maybe I am," I shot back. The words hung in the air, brittle and cold. He shook his head and walked away, muttering something about conspiracy theories. I stood there a moment longer, the new key warm in my hand. I thought back to those family Monopoly nights. Travis always played the banker and somehow always ended up with extra cash. Some things never changed. Later that night, I swung by the gas station to grab a large coffee and headed back to Lakeview Park. The place looked even more desolate under the pale moonlight. I parked near the rusted Ferris wheel, the so-called Wheel of Time. The shadows stretched long across the cracked pavement as I approached the base of the structure. The Ferris wheel towered above me, its spokes reaching out like skeletal fingers against the night sky. It reminded me of something from a Stephen King novel. Creepy but magnetic. I ran my hand along the cold metal of one of the support beams. Near the base, a faint glimmer caught my eye. A small metal plate was embedded in the beam, and just below it, a keyhole. My pulse quickened. I pulled the key from my pocket and slid it into the lock. It fit perfectly. With a deep breath, I turned it. A metallic click echoed through the night. The plate shifted, revealing a small, hinged door. I crouched down and opened it. Inside, a dusty envelope lay on a rusted metal shelf. I carefully took it out, brushing off the cobwebs. The front of the envelope read Greenfield Trust in faded letters. I tore it open and pulled out a yellowed receipt. Greenfield Trust, Deposit Box number 1742. Opened, June 15th, 1953. My heart raced. Grandma hadn't just left me a puzzle. She'd left me a trail to something stored away for nearly 70 years. And of course, the year 1953 again. The year she always said was the start of everything. The wind picked up, rattling the Ferris wheel and sending a chill through my spine. I stood up, gripping the receipt like it might vanish if I let go. What had Grandma hidden in that safe deposit box? And why had she gone through so much trouble to lead me here? I turned toward my car, glancing once more at the looming Ferris wheel. Whatever the answer was, it was locked away at Greenfield Trust, and I was going to find it. After all, mystery solving was starting to feel like a weird family tradition. Plus, it definitely beat arguing with Travis over leftover Thanksgiving pie. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the receipt from Greenfield Trust lying next to my coffee mug. The date, June 15th, 1953, stood out like a beacon. I tapped my fingers on the table, trying to imagine Grandma, decades younger, walking into that bank with some secret plan in mind. What had she been up to? I took a sip of my coffee and grimaced. Lukewarm. Classic. I'd been so wrapped up in my thoughts that I let it sit there like an abandoned science experiment. I pulled out my phone and looked up the bank. Greenfield Trust still existed, though it had moved from its old downtown location to a shiny glass tower near the industrial district. I drained the rest of the sad coffee, grabbed my jacket, and headed out. The drive took about 20 minutes, with traffic as unpredictable as always. Chicago traffic, man, like a video game where everyone forgets the rules and the winner gets a dented bumper. I passed familiar landmarks. The old diner where Grandma used to order pancakes, crispy, and the hardware store where Grandpa would spend hours comparing screws like he was choosing fine wine. Nostalgia tugged at me, but the mystery pulled harder. The bank's lobby was sleek and modern. Marble floors, minimalist furniture, and that faint lemony scent that all banks seem to share. Seriously, why do all banks smell like lemon and anxiety? I approached the nearest teller, a woman in her 20s who barely glanced up from her computer. "Hi, I need to check on a safe deposit box," I said, sliding the receipt across the counter. She glanced at it, then frowned. "This is pretty old. Let me get someone." I shifted on my feet as she walked away. After a few minutes, an older man with a neatly trimmed mustache and a vest that looked older than me appeared. "I'm Walter," he said with a warm smile. "You're here about box 1742. Yeah, my grandmother, Eleanor Harris, opened it in 1953. Walter's eyes lit up. Eleanor Harris. I remember her. She was a regular here for years. Always said she was planning for the future. My pulse quickened. Did she ever say what was in the box? He shook his head. Nope. Just that one day. It would matter. He gestured for me to follow. "Let me take you to the vault." We passed through a heavy metal door into a dimly lit room lined with rows of safe deposit boxes. Walter stopped in front of box 1742 and inserted a master key. "Your key?" he asked. I fumbled in my pocket and handed it over. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. Inside was a thick manila envelope. I grabbed it and stepped back, my hands trembling. Walter gave me an encouraging nod. "Take your time," he said, retreating to his desk. I opened the envelope. Inside were several documents. The first was a deed dated 1974 for 3 plots of land in an industrial zone near the Chicago River. Another document listed the purchase price. Next to nothing, and at the bottom of the stack was a note in Grandma's handwriting. For the future. Trust in the land. I stared at the papers. Why would Grandma buy industrial land? She'd never mentioned anything about investments. My mind raced with possibilities. I mean, this was a woman who once cut out coupons for canned peas she didn't even like. Yet here she was, buying property like some secret real estate mogul. I tucked the documents back into the envelope and left the vault. Walter smiled as I passed. "She was a sharp woman, your grandma," he said. "Always thinking ahead." "Yeah," I said, voice tight. "She sure was." Back in my car, I spread the documents across the passenger seat. The land was located on South Water Street, an area I'd driven past countless times. Old warehouses, rusty cranes, and the faint smell of the river in the air. What was Grandma trying to tell me? The only way to find out was to go there myself. And maybe, just maybe, grab a deep dish pizza on the way, because mysteries are better on a full stomach. The next morning, I sat in my car, parked near the river on South Water Street, staring out at the rusting warehouses. The documents from the bank lay spread across the passenger seat, the address highlighted. 3 plots of land right here. My GPS confirmed it. Grandma had bought this property back in 1974, when the area was nothing more than factories belching smoke and rats running their own underground network. Now, things look different. In place of crumbling warehouses, a construction site buzzed with activity. Bulldozers rumbled. Cranes reached into the sky like mechanical dinosaurs, and workers in neon vests barked into walkie-talkies. A massive sign loomed by the gate. Future site of Riverfront Plaza, Chicago's premier shopping destination. I gripped the steering wheel. Grandma's land. This was it. My heart hammered as I thought about that note. For the future. Trust in the land. I pulled out my phone and searched for Riverfront Plaza. The first headline hit me like a punch. New shopping development set to boost local economy. Project valued at $65 million. $65 million. I stared at the figure, trying to process it. Grandma had bought this land for peanuts. Probably less than what she spent on those ridiculous ceramic owl figurines she loved so much. Now it was worth millions. And here I was, sitting in a car that rattled if I turned the heat up too high. Life's funny like that. I scrolled further. The developer was listed as Crestfield Properties, a big-name real estate firm. But then I saw another name, original property owner, Eleanor Harris. Grandma's name, in black and white. The car suddenly felt too small. I cracked the window and gulped in the cool, river-scented air. It smelled like wet concrete and hot dogs from a vendor nearby, a smell that instantly transported me back to ball games with Grandpa, who never left without ketchup on his shoes. My phone buzzed with a text. Travis, find any treasure yet? Indiana Jones? I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I called the number listed for Crestfield Properties. After 2 rings, a chipper voice answered. Crestfield Properties, this is Dana. Hi, Dana, I said, trying to sound like someone who knew what they were doing. I'm Jacob Harris. My grandmother was Eleanor Harris. I believe she owned the land where you're building Riverfront Plaza. One moment, please, Dana said. The keyboard clicks were loud enough to hear through the phone. Yes, the Harris Properties. So, she sold the land? I asked, my voice tight. No, Dana said. The ownership records still list Eleanor Harris. There's no sale on file. Crestfield Properties is leasing the land from her estate. My heart skipped a beat. Leasing? Yes, sir, Dana confirmed. A long-term lease agreement signed in 1995. Payments are deposited quarterly to a trust account. Who set up the trust? It was arranged by a legal representative, Jack Thompson. Jack Thompson, Grandpa's old friend. The guy Grandma always said had shifty eyes. Thank you, I said, ending the call. I sat in stunned silence. Grandma hadn't sold the land. She'd leased it. And if the payments were going into a trust, that meant someone was sitting on a fortune. I called Travis. What's up, he answered. Meet me at the old park, I said. Now? Why? Just get there. I hung up and started the car. If Grandma left us clues about the land, maybe she'd left something about the lease too. And the answers might still be hiding in the park, in the shadows of that rusted Ferris wheel. Because nothing about this made sense. And Grandma never did anything without a reason. The moment I walked into Travis's living room and dropped the documents on his coffee table, his face twisted from curiosity to disbelief. The crisp papers detailed the land Grandma had leased decades ago, the trust account holding millions, and the conditions surrounding it all. You're kidding me, Travis said, running a hand through his hair. His jaw dropped like he'd just seen the Cubs win the World Series again. This can't be real. It's real, I said, keeping my voice calm. Grandma never sold the land. She leased it. The money from the lease has been piling up for years in a trust. He snatched up the papers, flipping through them. So what does that mean? We get the money. Not we, I said. This is my inheritance. That's what Grandma wanted when she left me her journal with the clues. Travis's eyes darkened. That's not fair. I got the house. You get millions. Grandma left instructions, I said. I didn't make the rules. He threw the papers onto the table and stood up. She was losing it at the end. You really believe some treasure hunt determines who gets the money? Yeah, I said, clenching my jaw. I do. Grandma wasn't senile. She knew what she was doing. Travis stormed past me, grabbing his phone. Classic Travis. reacting without thinking, just like the time he sold his PlayStation to buy concert tickets. This is insane. I'm calling a realtor. If that land's ours, we can sell it now. You can't, I said, stepping between him and the door. It's protected by the trust. We'll see about that, he sneered, dialing. My stomach turned. I had to act fast. The next morning, I met with an attorney named Rachel Carter. She was sharp, direct, and didn't blink when I explained the situation. We'll file a notice of claim on the land, she said, typing furiously on her laptop. That'll stop any unauthorized sale. And the trust? I asked. We need more information, she said. Who set it up? Jack Thompson, I said. Her eyes widened slightly. That name sounds familiar. Let me check. She tapped a few keys and turned her screen toward me. An address appeared. A small town just outside the city. He's still alive, she said. Want me to call him? No, I said, my pulse racing. I'll go myself. The drive to Thompson's house felt endless. Every traffic light seemed to turn red just to test my patience. I rehearsed what I'd say, but when I arrived at the modest brick home, my words evaporated. I knocked, and the door opened with a creak. An elderly man with a cane stood before me, his eyes, sharp and assessing, locked on mine. Jacob Harris, he asked. Yes, I said, surprised. Been expecting you, he said, gesturing me inside. The living room smelled of wood polish and old books, reminding me of visiting Grandma's house during the holidays when she'd bake apple pies and quiz me with trivia questions. I sat across from him as he settled into a worn leather armchair. Your grandmother, he began, was the smartest person I ever met. Before she passed, she gave me clear instructions. She said one day, you'd come looking for answers. He opened a small safe beside his chair and handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked. An addendum to her will, he said, legally binding. It states that the land in the trust fund, worth several $1 million now, go to you. But only if you solve her puzzle and find me or my appointed representative. My chest tightened. And you kept it all these years? He smiled faintly. The agreement gave me a percentage of the rent payments. It let me start a business for my family. My son runs it now. We never touched the principal. That's yours. I stood up, clutching the envelope. Thank you for being honest. Your grandma trusted me, he said, eyes glistening. I owed her that. I drove home, adrenaline surging through me. The land was mine. The money was real. And Travis? I could already hear him flipping out when he heard the news. The days following my meeting with Jack Thompson felt like a whirlwind, like trying to drink from a fire hose. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the envelope he'd given me. Inside were official documents confirming the trust, the land ownership, and the instructions Grandma had left behind. It was all real. The land was mine. The millions in the trust were mine. But more than that, the story behind it all, the legacy, was mine to protect. First, I called Rachel Carter, my attorney. We need to finalize the transfer of the trust into my name, I said. And I want to sell one of the plots. The Riverfront Plaza site, she asked. No, I said, thinking back to the quiet stretch of land on the west side of the property. Sell the smaller lot by the river. Got it, she said. I'll start the paperwork. Selling that lot brought in more money than I could wrap my head around. I signed the final paperwork while sitting in Rachel's office, my hand trembling as I wrote my name on the dotted line. When it was done, I stared at the check. $3 million. It looked like Monopoly money. My brain struggled to process that this tiny slip of paper was worth more than every paycheck I'd ever earned combined. Congratulations, Rachel said with a smile. What's next? I'm opening a cafe, I said. Her eyebrows shot up. A cafe? Yeah, a place to remember where all this started. 2 months later, Lakeview Memories opened its doors. The cafe sat in a cozy brick building near the park, with big windows that let in the morning sunlight. Inside, the walls were lined with framed black and white photos from the old Lakeview Park. Kids eating cotton candy, couples riding the Ferris wheel, families gathered around picnic tables. I even found a picture of Grandma and Grandpa from the summer of 1953, standing in front of the Ferris wheel, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. The menu was simple: strong coffee, homemade donuts glazed just like the ones Grandma used to buy, and a few hearty breakfast options. I added a bottomless coffee option because, as every diner regular knows, unlimited caffeine is a basic human right. I made sure the hot dogs came with both mustard and ketchup, despite Grandma's insistence that ketchup on hot dogs was an abomination. Opening day was a blur. Neighbors, old friends, even some strangers drawn in by curiosity, filled the cafe. I stood behind the counter, pouring coffee and chatting with customers. One older man pointed at a picture of the Ferris wheel and said, "I proposed to my wife right there in '68. His voice cracked when he said it, and his grandson looked up at him with wide eyes. Then the door opened, and Travis walked in. He stood there, looking around at the pictures. His gaze lingered on the one of Grandma and Grandpa. He shifted on his feet, fidgeting with his keys. I braced myself for some sarcastic remark, but it didn't come. "Nice place," he said eventually. "Thanks," I said, wiping my hands on a towel. "Want a coffee?" "Yeah," he said, sliding into a stool at the counter. "Black." I poured the coffee and set it in front of him. He stared into the cup for a moment, then glanced up. "I was a jerk," he said. "About the money. About Grandma." "Yeah," I said with a grin. "You were." He huffed a laugh. "So, you're rich now, huh?" "Apparently," I said. "But you know what? The money's not the best part." He raised an eyebrow. "Really?" I gestured to the walls. "Grandma didn't just leave me money. She left me a story. This place, it's her story. Our story." Travis looked around again, his shoulders relaxing. "Yeah, I guess it is." We sat there in companionable silence for a while. Outside, kids ran to the park, laughing as they chased each other around the old Ferris wheel. The shadows stretched across the ground, just like they had when Grandma first sent me on this journey. The past wasn't just something locked away in dusty journals and forgotten deeds. It was alive, woven into every smile, every memory, every photo hanging on these walls. Grandma knew that, and now I did too. Lakeview Memories became more than just a cafe. It became a place where people came to connect, to remember the old park, to share stories, to pass down little pieces of history to their kids over donuts and coffee. And every time I saw someone smile at one of the pictures on the wall, I whispered a quiet thanks to Grandma. She'd given me more than land and money. She'd given me a legacy, and I'd spend the rest of my life honoring it.